cause some damage. All right, I just want to welcome everybody to tonight's Monday, April 7th, 2025 legislative session. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order at 5:30 p.m. If I could please get everybody to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, republic for which it stands. Thank you, everyone. Just like to remind council about our shared beliefs of being open and honest this evening, and that'll move us directly into roll call.
Good evening, Chair. I'm just going to let someone in here. Thank you. I'll start with Chair Bowman,
Present.
Vice Chair Perry,
Present.
Councilmember Beinecker,
Here.
Councilmember Ritchie,
Present.
Councilmember Malay,
Present.
and Councilmember Morton.
Present.
Let the record show we have the following staff in attendance. We have City Manager Albert Tripp, City Attorney Daniel Gibbons, Police Chief Brad Richmond, Planning Director Heather Troutman, Associate Planner Zachary Becker, Assistant Public Works Director Steve Flute, and Clerk Treasurer Stanley Schubert. That concludes the roll call.
All right, thank you. For tonight's agenda, we're going to move items D and F for action items to the end. We are going to have an executive session prior to those items. But with that, I think, Albert, no other changes?
There are no other proposed changes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Tripp. All right, with that being said, council, what would we like to do about tonight's agenda?
Move to approve.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? I have a second. Any questions or comments? Not seeing any. All those in favor? All right, that passes unanimously. That moves on to announcements and presentations. Albert, there's none for this evening, correct?
Correct. No, there are no presentations or announcements this evening.
All right, thank you. Move us on to council reports.
Yeah, I have asked Albert to put on the agenda for the next study session for us to have a discussion and some more information about the 6th Avenue, what the citizens was complaining about, the things in the middle. I'd like to discuss that during the next studies. See if we can get more information on what's being done.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
I might as well just mention it now. It's not really a report, it's just a statement. For about 2 to 3 months, I've been noodling around with the idea of finishing this term and not running again next year, primarily due to the fact that I think since I've been on this committee since July of 2022, and it's been a really rewarding experience, entertaining too. But nonetheless, I think it's important to give other people in the community an opportunity to do and experience what I've done. So my intentions are, I've revisited this whole issue, and I don't think I'm gonna, put in my name to run again for next year. So my plan is to finish out this term through the end of December, and then hopefully we'll get somebody else to replace me, and that'll do a better job than I've done. Thanks.
Thank you for that. The only thing that I have is a few of us, Ms. Troutman, Ms. Morton, Albert, and myself flew out to Washington, D.C. It was fruitful. Just met with the Department of Transportation, with our congressional delegates, trying to get funding for a few different projects that we have in the city. Sounds like funding's pretty tight right now out there. It seems like there's a lot of agencies that have had either funding paused or pulled back, and that there's some fear over spending right now. So at this point in time, we're going to continue to advocate for the projects that we have in the queue and just see if we can work. We've got a few different options for additional funding sources that we're going to look into, especially for the Highway 2 project. But other than that, that's all I have. All right, with that, move us on to staff reports.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll start with City Manager Tripp. Any report for council?
Piggybacking on the chair's comment about advocating for funds either at the federal level or state level, it appears efforts at the state level are paying off. As council is aware, the city service campus was a priority this legislative session, which included a request for funding to be able to complete the design for the remainder of that space, the police station and the court, along with city services in general. And it appears that it's in both chambers' budget, the House and the Senate side, which is a good sign. Of course, we won't know the final version until it's ultimately adopted. But if that bodes well through the end of session, then we'll be in a position to commence the design perhaps as early as July, go through February, and then whatever fruit comes from the federal progress to ask for funding to build out a portion of that space will essentially be shovel ready to be ready to implement on that. That's the extent of my report. Unless there are any questions.
Well, I think not necessarily a question, but it was mentioned over and over and over to kind of, especially when we're asking for funding at this point in time to, basically they're the last in where we've already done everything that we possibly can for the projects themselves. As far as, any preparations, any planning is concerned, like basically just being ready and also gathering as much funding as we can from local and state before we even ask for federal dollars. So that was one thing that kind of stood out to me on that as well is, they're looking for us to do our due diligence to say, hey, we don't just come to us with, for initial funding, come to us when you kind of exhausted all means. So.
Thank you, Mr. Tripp. Mr. Gibbons, any report for council?
No report, thanks.
Thank you. Chief Richmond, any report? No report, thank you. Ms. Troutman?
Thank you. Just to add that we did get kudos during our presentation for our preparation. Not only that we had shovel-ready projects, that we'd included mandatory NEPA environmental review, and we had secured local funding for our projects. And so the indication was we were already ahead of the pack at the time of application as we moved forward. And so very much we appreciated their time, and they did appreciate our presence there and the awareness of the projects, and gave us some good ideas of some additional resources to tap for funding for the project. So we have follow-up to do from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Troutman. Mr. Becker, any report?
No report.
Thank you. Mr. Flute, any report? Thank you. No report for me. That concludes staff reports.
All right, thank you. That'll move us into our public hearing for this evening for missing middle housing. We have a presentation and public comment on there. We'll go ahead and move into the public hearing at 5:38.
Thank you very much. For purposes of time and consideration that we do have public here to testify tonight, we do have a brief summary with regards to the work we've been engaged for this requirement for addressing additional types of housing within Washington State, having to do with several bills that were passed in the legislature that applied to Airway Heights as a Tier 3 city. And with that, in general, we have a number of ordinances, 22, in which we'll be covering tonight. Much of it, the substance, are actually within the 2 consolidated zones that are being proposed. And we'll talk a bit more about most of the other ordinances, which are light touches because of things like name changes to the zoning. So tonight, we do have for you in consideration of your packet the full background to this project. So that includes the Planning Commission's recommendations and resolution. It includes any public comments we received to date with regards to the project, a staff report identifying the consistency between this package and the comprehensive plan, that we have gone through the mandatory process with the Washington State Department of Commerce for review of the documentation, and completed the mandatory environmental review and pre-adoption notice. So those are just informational, but they are important because it shows that we have gone through and checked the boxes, so to speak, as we go forward. So tonight, we actually have 3 elements for you with regards to this, and we're going to keep it really pretty brief, 10 to 15 minutes, and then questions from the council before turning that over for public testimony. First, we have an overview from our consultants at Framework, which are Jeff Arango and Bobo Kai. We did brief this during study sessions previously with the council, which is their policy to pre-brief items before coming to hearing. We also have the Department of Commerce here tonight from both the Growth Management Division on the periodic update requirements, as well as the Missing Middle Group, who have some additional information to provide. And then we'll close out with some specifics having to do with really the other parts of the amendments so that there's clarity on why we're touching traffic impact fees and why we're touching water services as part of this ordinance package. So with that, I'll hand this over to Frameworks for an overview and a slight graphic presentation of the purpose of Missing Middle and the recommendations. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Heather. Good evening. My name is Jeff Arango, and I am the managing principal at Framework and the project manager for this project. And here tonight, we'll give an overview of the middle housing code amendments, as Heather described. We began this process about a year ago. We started first with an audit of the code and some feasibility testing for middle housing. We've done some community engagement, which I'll go over, and had extensive discussions with the Planning Commission, as well as a couple of meetings with the City Council, and just wanted to thank all of those that have taken the time to participate in the process. Your input's been really valuable for us to get to this point, so thank you. Okay, so our agenda will just provide a brief overview of what middle housing and ADUs, what the implications are. Go over the two bills that we are seeking to implement with this ordinance, touch a little bit on our code audit findings, the community engagement, and then go through the proposed amendments. So middle housing definition you can see at the top of your screen means buildings that are compatible in scale, form, and character with single-family houses. They can contain 2 or more units in an attached, stacked, or clustered home configuration. And these include duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, townhouses, stacked flats, courtyard apartments, and cottage housing. Each of those housing types is specifically called out and defined in the bill. And then an accessory dwelling unit is a dwelling unit that's located on the same lot as a single-family housing unit, duplex, triplex, townhouse, or other housing units. And these are meant to be compatible in the scale and form of single-family homes. And these bills apply specifically to areas that have predominantly single-family homes and similar development patterns. So the objectives of this amendment is to expand housing choices and support middle housing implementation in Airway Heights. We led the recent effort with city staff to overhaul the city's comprehensive plan, and we're currently working on the periodic update. So a lot of this, while it does require us to comply with the state law, is really aimed at implementing the city's comprehensive plan and more specifically the housing element. We want to ensure that there's livable outcomes, balancing the building scale and open space through a combination of development standards to make sure that it fits in with the existing development and neighborhoods within Airway Heights. And we want to encourage compatible scaled buildings, human scaled neighborhoods, and multimodal transportation. So Airway Heights is a tier 3 city, which is the lowest tier for compliance. It requires under HB 1110, the middle housing bill, to allow 2 units on every lot, regardless of size, as long as it's larger than 1,000 square feet. And then the ADU bill requires us to allow 2 ADUs on a lot when associated with a single family home. And a local decision is whether ADUs count towards the density requirements for HB 1110 or not. The housing types that we're required to provide for are the ones that can come in combinations of 2 units. So those are duplexes, cottages, courtyard apartments, and stacked flats. And then the bill encourages cities to go beyond the minimum requirements to meet their own local housing needs and could authorize, under certain circumstances, other housing types such as those listed here. So we are implementing middle housing across 3 districts, the R1, the R2, and the R3. And you can see maps of those on the screen. Existing lots, most are developed. Since Airway Heights is a relatively fast-growing community, the minimum lot sizes under current code, depending on the district, range in size from 6,000 to 7,200 square feet for the minimum size, and they could be larger. 35% lot coverage, cap not including garages, and that does not include other impervious surfaces. It's just for the buildings themselves. Middle housing opportunities will occur in several different ways. There could be building on new vacant lots, could be remodeling an existing home and incorporating another unit within the existing footprint and envelope of a single family home. And then infill development where there's available space on a lot, additional buildings or units could be added, assuming it meets all of the development standards. So as part of the code audit effort, we did quite extensive physical testing through the models that you see here. And some of our key findings are that 3 units per lot is feasible with our existing lot sizes. So again, testing lot sizes in the range of 6,000 to 7,200 square feet. 6 of the middle housing, 9 middle housing types can fit on existing lots with smart design. And providing some flexibility in standards can help with the feasibility and support more variety of housing and improved livability for those units. So community engagement, we have a project website that we've been using. We held 2 focus groups, one that was part of a neighborhood tour that we took in Airway Heights, as well as an in-person focus group that was part of that as well. We held a public open house at the rec center, and then we provided project update flyers and postcards to build awareness about the project. Speaking more specifically to the code amendment proposal, you can see the list here of the items that we're incorporating. So one is that we are proposing to consolidate some of the residential zones to 2 zoning districts from 3, allowing what we're calling scalable density. So if you have a larger lot, you can produce more units on that using the same density that's applied to the minimum lot sizes. Allowing more middle housing typologies than the ones that we listed earlier in the presentation, and then updating dimensional standards to regulate building volume and scale to keep it at a desirable and appropriate scale within existing neighborhoods. So things like minimum lot size, minimum frontage, setbacks, building cover, density, and height are things that we took a look at, and in some cases are recommending the existing standards that are in place today. And then some additional tools that we've incorporated that help regulate middle housing to ensure compatibility with existing neighborhoods and development. That includes a floor to area ratio, which is scalable based on the number of units, a maximum building footprint, max units, number of units per building, and then pedestrian and vehicle access. And these have all been tested so that we could ensure that family-sized units would be feasible across a variety of housing types, for example. We've added some graphic cut sheets that explain how some of the standards work, which can be really helpful for applicants and for the city as they administer the new code. Some updates to parking and alley access requirements to support middle housing implementation with more units on each lot, or the potential for that. It's important to think a little more creatively about how parking and access are handled. We've added, which is a requirement, what's called a unit lot subdivision process, which supports home ownership, and it essentially allows a parent lot, a larger lot, to be divided up into smaller ownership groups. Typically, those unit lots are the footprint of a building, but they could be larger. We have some graphics to show you how that looks. And then we've updated the planned unit development requirements to allow greater flexibility and to be able to accommodate and regulate larger scale projects that incorporate middle housing. So this shows the zone consolidation. The 2 proposed zones are the NFR, which is the neighborhood family residential zone, shown in the light blue, and then the MFR, which is the multifamily residential zone, shown in the dark blue. Light blue, dark blue. So this shows a comparison of the development standards for the neighborhood family residential zone. And here on the green, in the green box, shows the existing standards for the R1 and the R2. The R1 has a minimum lot size of 7,200 square feet and the R2 6,000. The existing coverage is 35%, but you can have 50% with your garage. The building height existing is 35 feet, although most units tend to only build to around 2 stories or 24 feet. Our proposal, which was presented to the Planning Commission, was to maintain a lot size of 7,200 square feet, which allows for a little bit more open space potentially to create a little bit more livability for middle housing units. Lot coverage at 40% and building height at 35 feet, which is the existing standard. In the orange box is the Department of Commerce recommendation in their model code, and they did not make a recommendation on lot size, but talked about first looking at local communities' lot sizes and considering how that can accommodate middle housing, which we've done. They recommend a lot coverage of 40% for some of the reasons that I just described, ensuring open space and livability in these areas, considering that some will not necessarily be walkable to things like parks and commercial services and things like that. Building height of 35 feet is consistent with our recommendation and what is in the model code, as well as the existing code for airway heights. The Planning Commission recommendation, based on feedback from some of the stakeholders, is 6,000 square feet. So that would be consistent with the lot size that's in the existing R2 zone. A lot coverage of 50% and an increase in height to 45 feet to accommodate 4 stories of development. In the MFR zone, the minimum lot size is currently 6,000 square feet with a coverage of 50% and a building height of 35 feet. We proposed 6,000 square feet, lot coverage of 40%, and a building height of 35 feet. Department of Commerce made the same recommendations in their model code as staff proposed, and the Planning Commission recommendation consistent with the NFR zone recommendation of a 6,000 square foot lot size, 50% lot coverage, and 45 feet in height. So this shows the density adjustment, and this is when you apply the number of units per lot, which is in the bill, to the minimum lot size, you can come up with a units per acre density, which then can be applied to larger lots. So for example, if you have a lot that is 1.5 times the minimum lot size, you don't need to subdivide, and you could do some additional units by applying the density of 22 units per acre, which is again based on the base requirement of the bill for numbers of units per lot, regardless of size. Now we'll go through some of the dimensional standards. Again, the scalable density approach would say that you can do 22 units per acre or 3 units per lot, whichever is higher. And there's a calculator that we've created that will help assist applicants in the city in determining that. It's fairly straightforward. Another tool that we've recommended and we have included in other middle housing codes that we've done for other communities which have been adopted is a scalable FAR approach. There is a similar approach in the Department of Commerce model code, although I believe their FAR recommendations are a little bit higher than what we proposed here. And so first, if you have a single family home, you can develop an FAR that's equal to half the size of the lot. So the square footage of the single family home could be half of the size of the lot. And if the minimum lot size is say 6,000 square feet, then you could have a 3,000 square foot single family home. And then as you add additional units, you get additional floor area. And then that floor area can be divided up equally among the 3 units, or you could have some bigger and larger units. So it is very flexible in that way. And again, we've tested these to be able to produce units that I think can accommodate families, smaller households. There's, again, a lot of flexibility depending on the target that those developing these units would like to hit. And this also, I think, is a built-in incentive to have more and smaller units versus having just larger, less affordable single-family homes, which would be more likely to happen without an FAR standard put in place. So height and building coverage, I think I've gone over this to some degree, but I'll just touch on it again. Commerce recommendation 35 feet, staff proposal 35 feet. There is provision in the planned unit development updated section that would allow some increased height under the PUD provision. So there is some flexibility there, particularly for larger projects. Commerce recommendation on building coverage and staff recommendation 40%. And again, you can get up to 60% through the PUD process. So we've done the testing. We think that these work, and there is flexibility, again, for larger sites and for planned unit developments to be able to have more flexibility on these standards. So here's an example of putting 3 units on a 6,000 square foot lot with 40% coverage. On the left-hand side are townhomes, 800 square foot footprint, so just the base of the building. That could be scaled at 2 or 3 stories, resulting in units between 1,600 and 2,400 square feet. So quite large units. They could obviously be smaller than that, but again, I think these are getting into fairly large unit sizes, or the potential for that. The middle one shows stacked flats with a 2,400 square foot footprint stacked vertically, 1,800 square feet plus a 600 square foot garage per unit. And then the one on the right-hand side, 600 square foot footprint for cottages, and those could be at 1 or 2 stories, resulting in 6 to 1,200 square foot units, 1 enclosed parking space for each of those units as well. These are some examples from a housing, kind of a model housing, kind of a catalog or resource book that was developed up in British Columbia. It's a fantastic resource and one we're familiar with. It was also brought forward by one of the stakeholders. We've gone through and tested some of these concepts to ensure that they could be feasible under the code, and believe that they are. This shows a 6,000 square foot lot, 50 by 120, 4 units, 500 square foot footprint, and you get to between 1,000 and 1,500 square feet per unit, 27 foot height for 2 floors, 35 foot height for 3 floors, and the building coverage is at 33%. So all within the standards that we have proposed. Another example here on a larger lot, 4 units with 760 square foot footprint, results in units between 1,500 and 2,200 square feet, 26 foot height for the 2 floors, 35 for the 3, and 24% building coverage, because it's a significantly larger lot than on the previous example. And you can see here the amount of open space that it creates. So it's fairly dense, but there's a lot of open space, areas for landscaping as well. Makes it very livable in kind of a multi-unit configuration. Parking updates. There are some provisions in both of these bills that require changes to parking. And in some cases, we've made some locally crafted updates as well. So single family and middle housing gone down to 1 space per unit, which I think is reasonable and will help with some of the feasibility. Applicants may count up to 3 on-street spaces towards the requirement if there is on-street parking. Multifamily development studios and 1 bedroom be 1 stall for larger units of 2+ bedrooms, 1.5. And then 1 space on key corridors where there's more access potentially to transit and other services. And then for ADUs, we're proposing 1 per unit, ability to count on-street parking, and no parking within ½ mile of a major transit stop, which is a requirement of the ADU bill. So setbacks, 20 feet without an alley, 10 feet with an alley in the rear to provide more flexibility. Standard rear setback of 10 feet, side 5 feet, and on a quarter lot, there are 2 setbacks of 10 feet, so less than the standard 20 to provide more flexibility. Building spaces, spacing is 10 feet, and some of that comes from the building code. And then porches, decks, and awnings are allowed in the front setback if not enclosed, with 36 to 48 inch railings and roofs extending 10 feet. also allowed in the rear setback. And on the right-hand side is example of one of the diagrams that would appear in the code and helps to illustrate the standards, which you see in the table below. Pedestrian and vehicle access, very important consideration for middle housing. To make it a success, we are encouraging alley access, requiring it in some situations. Alleys must be at least 20 feet in width with no obstructions. 3-foot paved pedestrian connections are required to middle housing units. Alleys abutting lots must use it for vehicle access, which helps to reduce potentials for vehicle and pedestrian or bike collisions because they will be accessing those sites from the alleys now. Alley access is required for lots with 5 plus units unless it's deemed infeasible by Public Works due to some physical constraint. We've coordinated with the Public Works Department on the driveway and access standards. And lots without access to an improved alley and taking vehicular access from the street must comply with these sections. Again, consistent with the Public Works standards, there is no limit on the number of units served by a driveway on the same lot. And then shared driveways are allowed between 2 lots as well. And then there are some standards that deal with how wide a driveway can be relative to the frontage of the lot. And then next section deals with unit lot subdivision, which I mentioned briefly earlier in the beginning of the presentation. And this is again a requirement, but allows for more home ownership by allowing individuals to own middle housing units on the same parent lot. And then there is also rules under the new ADU bill that ADUs must be allowed to be sold separately, and they can be done through the unit lot provisions. So a unit lot, again, it creates smaller lots within a parent lot. So in these examples, the outside is the parent lot, and then the unit lot is within the dotted orange. And all of the development standards, setbacks, coverage, all apply to the larger parent lot. And it's sort of cumulative across all of the units. These configurations could be developed with or without unit lots. So they could be developed with a single ownership and rental, and later could be established as unit lots, which will allow for home ownership. So we had to make sure that the development standards apply regardless of whether the unit lot provision is used or not. ULS is intended primarily for smaller sites. So for larger projects where there wants to be use of individual ownership in a similar format, they would use the PUD section. And it's not intended to replace the land division process or function as a type of PUD, although it can be related. And then finally, these are the other just sections that we've had to update for consistency as well. So if there's any questions on those, let us know. And with that, I will turn it back over for discussion and questions. And we have a few additional slides if we need to refer to them in terms of any more detail on any of these topics. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. At this time, are there any specific questions on the draft, or would you prefer to move on to having the Department of Commerce speak? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jeff. I believe that we have Ethan here today as well as Laura. Either one of you, if you'd like to speak with regards to the periodic update relationship to missing middle and missing middle.
Yeah, I'll do that, Heather. Thank you. Hello, council members. My name's Ethan Porter. I'm one of the middle housing planners at the Department of Commerce. I can just do a quick overview. I don't want to take too much of your time and repeat what was already said from Jeff, but I'll just cover kind of some of the highlighted points here. Kind of when we're talking about middle housing, basically that is defined, as Jeff mentioned, being compatible in scale, form, and character with existing single family houses. Obviously, this varies a little bit between communities. But the model ordinance was developed by professional builders when it was getting created. They had builders, architects, planners from across the state, excuse me, that came together. It's intended to be compatible with the existing single-family neighborhoods and can be adopted outright by cities or used as a guide. Or the model ordinance, excuse me, can be adopted outright or used as a guide, as kind of what was mentioned already tonight. But that does help the implementation of middle housing. The model ordinance that does go into effect if the city does not adopt regulations consistent with state law. And so 6 months after periodic update, the state law would then basically take effect if there's not an adoption of ordinance for middle housing. So hopefully that kind of just highlights the middle housing and kind of the model ordinance reference, but I will answer any questions. Laura and myself will answer any questions as they come through regarding, lot subdivisions, middle housing as well. But ultimately, all the items were pretty much touched on that Jeff already mentioned. So I don't want to repeat what was already said. Unless Laura, you want to add anything onto that, but
I don't have anything to add to that. I think we're more available for questions if there's any questions about, how middle housing fits into the periodic update. I'm happy to answer those as they come along, but again, want to focus on what the core items today.
Thank you very much, Laura, and thank you very much, Ethan. So Laura Hodgson, representing the Department of Commerce for our periodic update. And so that's one of the items that we just wanted to identify is that this is a system with regards to these new requirements from the state of Washington. And this is one part of it while we're continuing to work on other elements we've been briefing over the several months with regards to our periodic update, which does include a housing element, and eventually we'll be working on things like our housing allocation, affordable housing allocation, and looking at ways in which we can tie things like employment to housing as we move forward. And thank you very much, Ethan. They are our chief reviewers for the documentation that we've submitted to ensure that we're compliant with these new state laws. So with that, we'll just summarize with regards to the remainder of the packet, which you have before you, because there's a lot of ordinances. And for the most part, these ordinances are related to specifically cross-referencing. And Daniel Gibbons is always sure to make sure that we include these. So as we touch other sections of the code like 1705 zones, we're updating zoning descriptions, 1219 transportation impact fees, we're updating the zone references. 1304, we're referencing the zoning and additionally the missing middle housing types for purposes of water. The same as for 1306 sanitary sewer system. For water concurrency under 1411, it is limited specifically again to updating to the housing types with regards to the missing middle, which Jeff has already briefed. In Title 16, we updated the unit lot subdivision. That's a new law that requires us to consider essentially this type of short subdivision to allow for separation on an existing infill so that we have homeownership opportunities. Definitions under 1704, again, updating for zoning classifications. Excuse me, same thing for several other zones. We're also eliminating some of the zones as well. Needs a drink of water. So as you know, we've consolidated down the single family manufactured housing zone, duplex zone, and multifamily down to just 2 zones. 1715, the airport overlay zone. Again, a cross-reference to the zoning categories. The planning and development has been updated as noted, and so there was interest expressed in flexibility for new development. So if it was a planned development of a number of lots, so there's no minimum size to apply, but they could go through this process to take advantage of greater flexibility than what is presently in the draft before you, including things like building height, site coverage, reductions in parking, etc. Off-street parking's already been touched on. I should also note that this provision allows for credit for parking on the street when it's not obstructed by a driveway, for example. 1722, 1723 are landscaping and signs, updating the zoning references, elimination of the zero lot line development because that's already being achieved through the new requirements for unit lot subdivision. 1728 essential public facilities is also cross-referencing the zone. The manufactured home parks is being turned into essentially a conditional use permit rather than its own zone. And those are all of the ordinances in the package. There are 22 in total. And so we're available for any questions should you have that. And if you have questions later as well. And we also have people here for public testimony this evening. Thank you.
Well, at this point in time, if there's no questions for any of ordinances that are on the agenda, we'll go ahead and open up the floor for public comment. You could just make your way up to the front and please provide your name. I know we know most of you guys in the audience this evening, but yeah, we look forward to hearing from you. So go ahead.
Good evening. Oops. My name is Jim Frank. I'm with Greenstone Corporation, and we're a home builder here in Spokane. I'm here primarily. I've retired from Greenstone. I spent the last few years doing work with nonprofit housing providers and small developers who are trying to meet the need for affordable housing in all of our communities, not just Airway Heights, but the regional communities. And this work on middle housing is really important, and all the work that's happening around growth management right now is going to determine not only where we build, because they're trying to establish, are we going to change the urban growth boundary and all of that, but it's also going to define what kind of housing we have in our communities over the next 20 years. And there's a push from a lot of the professional planning communities and push from the Department of Commerce that we need to build more apartments. And there's a mistaken belief that the only way to provide housing for people that are middle income or low income is to build apartments. That's really mistaken. And it's less expensive, really. In our experience, it's less expensive to be able to build small homes on small lots. And if you can build small homes on small lots, you can provide housing that is home ownership, not just rental. And this kind of housing can be integrated into existing neighborhoods. When you build an apartment, there's just no way for that to integrate into a neighborhood. You live in a project. You don't really live in a neighborhood. And so the ability to build small houses on small lots is very, very important. And so it's really important that we get what we're doing here right and make sure that we provide that opportunity for home ownership, regardless of how much money you make. So I did a presentation. I submitted it a couple of weeks ago for the planning session. I don't know if you got a copy of it or not. But I'd like to go through some of the issues that I see with the standards that are being proposed. When you build small houses on small lots, it really means that you're clustering them around open space or clustering them around a shared drive of some kind, or you're building townhouses. So that's when I use that word small homes on small lots, it's either a small single family house or a duplex or triplex, or it's townhouses. And in order to do a small house on a small lot, very often it means you have to do 2 stories or 3 stories. And so townhouses are typically 3 stories because you have a garage level, and then you have a living level, and then you have a bedroom level. And it's the same thing with single family homes. You can have a living level, you can have a bedroom level. And then if you're going to have a garage with that unit, then you need to have a 3rd level, which is a garage level. So you can build on small lots. We have designed houses that are just 25 by 25 of 500 or 600 square foot. And if you go to 2 stories, you have a 1,200 or 1,000 to 1,200 square foot house. It's on a footprint of 500 square feet, and that will fit you can fit that on a 2,000 square foot lot. So it fits within the density of 20 units an acre that we're talking about, and they can look really nice. But on the height, you can't, when you're doing 3 stories, you cannot live with a 35-foot height. It just simply doesn't work. You've got basically 10 foot of floor. When if you have a 9-foot plate height, which is really important in a small house. A lot of houses only have an 8-foot plate height. But when you build a small house in a small space, it's really important to have that extra 1 foot of height because it makes the room feel bigger, even though it's a small space. And so by the time you do your foundation, 9 feet, then your floor system, and then another floor and floor system, the only way that you can build a house in 3-story and 35 feet is if you have a flat roof. And flat roofs don't really integrate very well with neighborhoods, so you need to be able to do a pitched roof. So we really urge that you go to 45-foot height, and that was a recommendation from the Plan Commission, that the building height go to 45 feet. I can tell you that cities like Liberty Lake, for example, in their low density zones have a height of 45 feet. And we're building townhouses in Liberty Lake, and they integrate very nicely with, you have to remember that's a maximum. Every building isn't 45 feet. It's a maximum in those situations where you need it and have the opportunity to do it. Site coverage is another issue. 40% site coverage is just too low, especially with townhouses. A lot of townhouses are only 15 to 20 feet wide. They have a 20-foot front yard. The townhouse might be 40 or 50 feet deep, and then there's a driveway. There are no side yards. There is no space to have excessive site coverage. And so very low site coverages, and this number is very low. This 40% is honestly the lowest site coverage of any jurisdiction in Spokane County. And so it's, the Plan Commission recommended 50%. We'd really like to see that be 60% site coverage. You need to, and you need to provide that opportunity to do these small houses on small lots. And this is one of the issues, and we're seeing this play out in the city of Spokane, for example. If you want to do apartments, if you don't want to create a lot, then none of these standards mean anything, because you always end up with a parking garage or something. You end up with a parking lot. And so you don't have to worry about site coverage because you've got this great big parking lot. You don't have to worry about these standards. They don't mean anything with apartments. So apartments become very easy to build. All you do is go get a building permit, and none of these standards mean anything. But when you want to subdivide and create a small lot, then all of a sudden these standards come into play, and they're very difficult, and they create impediments. And when you create impediments to home ownership, then people take the easy road out. They just build apartments. And it's not what we want. It's not the kind of housing that we want to have in our communities over the next 20 years. We want to have home ownership. The FAR ratio, the entire purpose of, you have site coverage and you have building height. So what's the purpose of FAR? FAR is just intended to be more restrictive. So you can meet the site coverage, you can meet the building height, but the FAR ratio is more restrictive than those two. That's the whole purpose of it, is to eliminate housing that meets the height limit, meets the site coverage standards, and they want it to be more restrictive. And again, they say it's scalable. But the problem is on one unit in duplexes, the standard is far too restrictive. So we're talking about a FAR ratio of 0.6. When you have a site coverage of 40%, you do two-story unit, you're already at 0.8. You're 2 stories on the 40% site coverage is 0.8 on a single family house. So it's just too restrictive. No other jurisdictions are using FAR for single family homes. Liberty Lake doesn't use it. The city of Spokane doesn't use it. And we recommend that you don't use it. I think if I understand correctly, the rear yard setback, if you don't have an alley, the rear yard setback is 10 feet. Is that right? And on the flanking street, how are you treating a flanking street? Is that 20 feet or is that something different?
So a corner lot has 2 streets, and so at the time of subdivision, the front yard is designated on the plat. So the side street is the flanking street. That's the one.
And is that the setback? Is
Is the 10 feet.
the same setback?
It's only 10.
It's 10 feet. Okay. Okay. I appreciate that clarification. And I think then, if I understand correctly, porches are allowed to encroach into the 20-foot front yard.
There are some of them can go further if they're not covered, but they do allow.
But a standard porch with a little cover over it is not enclosed, and so that can encroach into the front yard setback.
Jeff, can you pull up the slide real quick showing the setback requirements, please?
Because the Commerce Model Ordinance allows porches on a house, and porches are very important. Porches allow families to meet their neighbors, to integrate socially. It creates social fabric within a neighborhood. It's really, really important. And so we try to always build houses with porches, front porches, and very often they come within 10 feet of the sidewalk. And so just trying to understand if that's permitted under the ordinance being proposed or not.
So as long as they're not, roofs can extend.
But enclosed means there's walls around it.
Correct. So
Okay.
just a roof.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. Access is the next issue, and I'm not exactly sure where we're at here, but very often in an urban infill kind of situation, there are no alleys and there's no way to put an alley in. So if you're going to cluster lots and you're going to do small houses on small lots, then you have to have a shared drive, might be shared by 4 or 5 or 6 houses. And you create a little shared access, and I showed it on my submittal. And so you have to be able to allow that shared access, and the Commerce Model Ordinance has a very good section on shared drive access that we urge that you adopt. And so I don't know exactly what's being proposed right now, but that shared drive is very, very important because you're dealing with many, many situations where you don't have an alley and no way to build one. And so you have to be able to cluster around a shared driveway. And then finally, the subdivision section, the unit lot subdivision. So if I have an acre and I'm doing 20 small homes, that's the density that's permitted that they outlined, then in order to do that, I have to do 3 separate unit lot subdivisions. I have to have 3 separate applications. I have to have 3. So it makes it very complicated. And I don't understand. There is no legal requirement to limit the unit lot subdivision to a short plat. Nine lots is a short plat. You can do it with the long plat and still do the unit lot and get the benefit of the unit lot subdivision. Because you're trying to make, it is the things that you want to have happen, you have to make easy. You can't make them complicated, because if you make them complicated, people do something different. They take the easy route very often. And I want to tell you that the work that we did with Habitat on the Highland Village project, it took us 3 years to go through the entitlement process, 3 years. Most people are not going to spend 3 years going through an entitlement process. They're just going to build apartments. That's all. And so I'd urge you on the unit lot subdivision to allow them up to 3 acres. So a 3-acre parcel could be, you could use unit lot subdivision up to 3-acre parcel and not limit it to 9 units. Because if you limit it to 9 units, you're creating a very complex process for someone that has 1 acre and wants to cluster some small houses on it, end up having to do 3 separate unit lot subdivision applications. So I think that's everything that I had. I appreciate, your attention to the subject, and I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Well, I just wanted to get some clarification. The 35-foot limit that's being proposed by the DOC, that doesn't include pitch, right, of the roof? That's just the ceiling height of the 9 feet, 9 feet, 9 feet, correct?
That's correct. Building height is actually regulated under the International Residential Code. And so the International Residential Code requires a minimum level height, right? From the floor to the ceiling for every level. And then depending on the steepness of the pitch of the roof, sometimes it can be measured at the peak and sometimes it's measured at a midpoint. It's a formulaic requirement under the International Residential Code. But 3 stories at 35 feet can be achieved with required or allowed floor to ceiling elements as required under the International Residential Code. So it does not, a 3-story building does not require a flat roof in order to reach 3 stories. And that was something that was presented to the Planning Commission as part of the audit process that Frameworks went through, was to look at comparable building types and what you'd be able to achieve with different roof forms, which I think is the question that you're asking.
Yeah, so we can still have a pitch roof, 3 stories, and have the 35-foot requirement.
It's the decision by the builder to increase the distance from the floor to the ceiling in each level that starts to consume the amount of height. So those are decisions that a developer makes. And so when you start to increase those distances, you have less room available for your roof pitch under that formula under the International Residential Code. Does that make sense?
It does.
And how you choose to use those floors are an element of discussion. They're certainly up to the developer as well.
Okay. Questions on this?
So
I
just,
can tell you, we build a lot of townhouses. You cannot build townhouses in 35 feet and have a normal 412 or 512 pitch roof. You just can't.
and that's with the 9-foot, right?
Yeah,
Interior.
if you want to have a 9-foot plate and then the floor system, and then you want to have a pitched roof 412 means it's going up 4 feet for every 12 feet. So it's very, very normal to have your roof extend up 6, 7, 8 feet above the top plate of the living space. So just, and there's other problems too. Under the building code, your ground level is an average of the plane around the house. So if you have a lot that's sloping a little bit from back to front or front to back, then that could lower the level, that could lower the, even though your front floor plate is at the curb level. If the back side of it daylights a little bit, then that lowers the ground plane and that counts as part of the building height. So it gets quite complicated, but I can tell you that 35 feet is very restrictive. The city of Spokane has a 35-foot height limit. They used to have a 35-foot height limit in one of their middle density zones. And all you saw were houses, apartments to go 3 stories. They all built them with flat roofs. Just not a good idea. Thank you.
Well, and then under the PUD process, there will be, at least at that point, an opportunity for approval to go above the 35 feet, correct?
That's correct. The PUD ordinance as proposed in the neighborhood residential allows up to 40 feet. It could go beyond that. It was just a standard that was included based on testimony from stakeholders early on. And then in the multifamily, it recommended allowing 55 feet, so higher in the multifamily zone. And I should be quick to point out that a lot of what we're discussing today has to do with existing formulaic requirements under the International Residential Code about where you start your building height, where you end your building height. Those are not for discussion. They're adopted through the state building council and they're adopted somewhat uniformly in the state of Washington.
Because
with
it's
some
what, the
exceptions.
2024 code right now for the IBC that's adopted,
The 2022,
the
I
2022.
believe, is
Okay.
the code that we're at. We fell behind on some cycles in Washington State for the codes. But I know it sounds very complicated, but obviously this is really about the idea of creating an envelope for choices and then working within the building codes for the envelope that you create for the housing type.
Okay. Questions on that? No, all right. Is there any?
Well, I don't, this is now's the time. I had a question on one of the FAR ratio on what is the value, the purpose of that is just a rebuttal to.
Sure, absolutely. Jeff, can you pull up the slide showing building coverage maximized with building height? The goal is not to build development that's inconsistent with the character of each community, as Laura Hodgson's from the Department of Commerce. The missing middle package also specifically is not intended to develop and foster additional detached single-family housing. And that was one of the reasons why we went through the definition of the law. It's intended to foster multiple units on a property in a different configurations so that we're providing more choice to community. And it's a significant departure in the state of Washington from single-family homes on their own lot. And so the purpose is not to necessarily not only have more detached single family, but because it's an infill product and you're adding units, remember the definition that you saw earlier was to add additional units onto every single existing lot, was to figure out how that you would be able to manage those additional units with additional building coverage between what are now 2 or more units on every lot and still have a reasonable sized living unit and still reserve for space to access the secondary unit. That specifically came from our Public Works, Fire and Police Department, that we wanted to be able to access secondary units for emergency response, that we needed to, if possible, accommodate getting utilities back to those lots in the back, which means they cannot have any structures over them, that we also want to preserve potentially opportunities for access, for parking, and for open space. So when we think about coverage shift, can you do the one where you're showing the 40, 50, and 60% coverage? The reason for the application of floor area ratio is to manage that building bulk so that when you add additional units, whether it's the first single family that goes onto a lot or they add the detached ADU, that you're managing the bulk. And that's why the floor area ratio is applied, so that you're managing the height, the site coverage, and the volume of all of the buildings on the site as that site moves out. We're required under this new law to allow through our code the possibility for that to occur. So floor area ratio is the mechanism to assist with that building bulk. And in these scenarios, you can see what happens when site coverage increases as more units are added to a site. It still allows for buildings, but they begin to have to go taller, or they begin to cover more of the site area. And in particular, you can see as we move from the 40% to the 50 and the 60, how that affects the overall lot. So it's an important mechanism. And I want to point out in the examples that are given today that where the city of Airway Heights is at with missing middle is a different place than where the city of Spokane was. City of Spokane endeavored to do a comprehensive single effort to address all housing needs and did that in order to do a whole gamut of housing affordability and style. This project is specific to missing middle. It doesn't mean that we won't come back in the next 6 months to 12 months and talk about additional modifications in order to address our housing assignment, which includes affordable housing, and we may come back and need to tweak some of these to address mechanisms to make rental and homeownership more affordable. But the focus here is not, again, detached single family. It's an infill product. That was the intent of the law. And many of the provisions we've talked about and included here is framed on this idea that it's an infill product rather than taking undeveloped property and creating a new subdivision using missing middle. So that's why we're using floor area ratio, is again to manage all. It isn't specific to one kind of housing. It has to apply to all of the zone.
Okay. And then something else that I wanted to, just briefly cover. Many years ago, under a retreat that we did as a city, we wanted to reach out to the community and ask them, what do they want the city of Airway Heights to look like? And they came back to us. And they came back to us with, some pretty astounding numbers of what they wanted the community to look like, and it was primarily around single family residential homes, and that was something that was huge. And we had been planning, since I was on the planning commission 13 years ago, to kind of go down that route. This changes things slightly. But, I think that the plan that we have discussed over and over and over is something that, especially through, these other mechanisms that, we can always have these conversations around it. Right. And it's not that we're saying, no, you can't have 45 feet. It's just saying, let's review this project one-on-one, right? By individual basis.
You brought up 3 really good points, which sometimes we fail to mention. This obligation to create this body of regulation falls to the city, but the choice is the property owner. In this package, it's still proposing to have 6,000 square foot lots. If someone chooses to build a single family home on that lot, they would be able to do that. But by right, we're required to allow them to add to that lot. That's what this package is designed to do. So if they choose to build an ADU because they have an ailing family member and they want to bring them on site, or maybe it's a young couple that can't quite bridge the cost of that single family home, that they're going to bring in a unit type that they'd be able to rent. It's about choice, and those choices are the property owners. This doesn't preclude single family development moving forward. With regards to the community's vision, that was mentioned earlier about there's some misconception by planners and commerce about the only way to have affordable housing is through apartment buildings. This project does not contemplate or change any of the regulations with regards to apartments. What it does do is it takes us through the steps of the law and required us to examine 9 different types of housing in addition to ADUs, choose the ones that we felt were most appropriate for our community, and then adopt development regulations that would do that. So it does include clustered single-family homes on a single parcel around an open space. It does include townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes. Within that neighborhood residential zone, if someone had a large enough piece of property, let's say that they bought half of a block across the street, it would allow them to do what's called scalable density. That means that rather than just build a series of duplexes, they could build 1 sixplex. They wouldn't be able to go any greater than that based on the scalable density. So this project doesn't contemplate adding or forcing more types of apartment development, and they are still allowed within our multifamily zone under this project.
Another thing, one of Mr. Frank's points was that the developer is going to take the path of least resistance and just build apartments. Does this allow them to build apartments on?
Just as I spoke, the consolidated zone, which takes the R1 and the R2 zone, doesn't allow apartments. It does allow on a scalable density up to a sixplex. So technically, the International Residential Code stops at 4 units and the International Building Code kicks in at 5 and 6. But they would have to have, a larger piece of property it to be able to develop. So imagine like Highland Village, something very similar was already built there, which was triplexes, up and down triplexes that were connected through a common roof line. That would be something that would be able to be built by right if there was enough land in order for them to do that. But an apartment building greater than that, the type of developments you see here in Airway Heights, where there's 25 or 50 units, would not be expanded upon through this proposal. We are not proposing to expand the multifamily residential zone, and we're not proposing to introduce large apartment complex projects in the neighborhood residential zone as part of this process.
And how many current lots do we have available for the R3 or for that apartments could actually go on?
The only property that remains that hasn't been developed that has multifamily zoning is essentially the area that's between Sunset Elementary and Highway 2. That was an area that was rezoned to high-density residential as part of our comprehensive plan amendment and the subsequent rezone in 2022. So there are some vacant lots, but that's mostly a redevelopment opportunity which will likely take longer. Someone would need to purchase and consolidate those properties, and the rate of return would have to be significant. So the location is ideal because of it's adjacent to US 2. It'll be a high performance transit route, but currently there aren't undeveloped R3 land or what will be multifamily other than the remaining acreage within Highland Village. The remaining property, if you can pull that map up that shows the proposed zoning map, that's part of the action here. It doesn't expand the current boundaries of the R3 zone, which for undeveloped property, again, is Highland Village and the area around Sunset Elementary, which is the dark blue area just north of the light pink area. So those are existing zones that we have. Areas that are vacant are in the neighborhood residential zone, which are predominantly adjacent to Craig Road and adjacent to Hayford Road, almost to the city limits on the north.
And then we still have the additional requirements in the ABZ zone where we can't have the density, we can't have, anything south of Highway 2. So
That's correct. And we have discussed this before that as we move in phases through the requirements of growth management and all of the changes, this is a piece that we're picking up now in order to help us understand our land capacity analysis. And that was a product that we have to generate as part of our 26 update. The result of our analysis, which the council has reviewed, the summary, because of the limitations of not only Fairchild, but the Spokane National Airport, is that we would likely be proposing an urban growth area or two to the county as part of the process in the future, that potentially could become future annexation areas for growth in the city. And I just want to put one other caveat. Here's this conversation is intended to be more streamlined and very simple. When we talk about things like unit lot subdivision, there is no acreage limitation. It's 9 lots. It could be, every lot could be 3 lots. Every lot could be 1 lot. The intent of the unit lot subdivision was to create home ownership. That's why the Department of Commerce recommended it be limited to a simple administrative plating process that occurs in the state called short plating. So remember that scenario where somebody, maybe they needed to bring their elderly parent onto the property. They built an ADU in the back. 5 years down the road, they may not need that unit anymore. The purpose of the unit lot subdivision, as Commerce designed it, was so that there could be an act to separate that ADU from the home and they could sell it separately to someone else. But because it was created on the same lot as a single family, what the law says is that those units are forever bound together. That means that anytime either one of them wants to put a house addition on, we have to look at both lots to see whether or not there's remaining site coverage. We have to look at the overall floor area ratio in the future for those. And so it was a way in which the state was intending to help in the future create ownership opportunities as these lots were potentially designed or developed with 2 or more units on them. And so it was not intended to work around the formal subdivision process to create lots or the planning and development process, which allowed for the master planning of multiple units, irregardless of acreage, onto a piece of property, and to consider the overall development as part of that PUD process.
Okay.
I don't know why I remember this, Heather. It's kind of an odd piece of information, but I remember in 1978, that was 4 years after I graduated from high school. That's how old I am. The average lot size of a single family dwelling was 18,760 square feet. And I heard this gentleman earlier say, hey, I could build you a house on a 500 square foot postage stamp. I could do that. What I've got rattling around in my head, number one, I don't think the American dream included an apartment. I think they really did include, even though it's small, a single family home. People like the exclusivity of their own house, and I agree with that 100%. And I think when you start building homes, they kind of seamlessly blend into the landscape. They look normal. You don't have this big box with a flat roof on it. And, you pack a bunch of people in there. I just don't, that's just not the American dream that I remember growing up with. So I'm in agreement that I think, again, people want a single family home. Here's what my question is. Let's say I got a 6,000 square foot lot and I stand up a house on it, and then I decide I'm going to throw 2 ADUs on it. And I saw in that presentation that I have the right to sell those independently, right? So if I choose to sell one of those units, the ADUs that I built on my 6,000 square foot lot, how much property goes with that?
It could be as small as the footprint of the building, just as Mr. Frank described. It could be the 500 square foot footprint if that was the desire of the person creating the lot. But they'll be bound together in the future forever, because these are part of the state law, which has to do with making sure that there's covenants to make sure that their utilities are forever protected to reach those units, that there's perpetual access for those units in the future, even though it goes across somebody else's lot, et cetera.
So effectively, your lot of 6,000 becomes smaller.
Yes, it does, but it's up to the person who develops.
Right,
it
no,
to
I get it.
decide how big it is, but there are tenants that are in these other laws that are gonna require reciprocal access and utilities and so forth, and that is again part of the law as we move forward. So it could look in the future very similar to what Mr. Frank has described with regards to, you know, smaller homes or even townhomes on these lots. And several of the examples that were provided show townhomes as an example of a type of housing that can fit within these configurations. Again, these have been tested to ensure that they will work on the lots that we have. But it's a choice. If someone wants to go out and subdivide and make a single family lot subdivision, each of those property owners then has the choice of how they develop the lot. The burden, if you so to speak, from the state falls to us as the agency to have regulations that create the opportunity. And that's one of the reasons why when we heard that there was desire for more flexibility, we proposed the PUD process. And I should just mention that it's very unfortunate that Highland Village went through a 3-year process. Those boundaries don't exist today. Through these actions of a potential adoption of the zoning provisions in combination with a PUD and a subdivision, a developer could come in the door and propose the type of development that, you know, potentially would include a mix of townhome and cottage house developing as a brand new complex, you know, on a 3-acre or more piece of property. And the standard now says specifically that these are things that they can ask for. It isn't something that's a question because it identifies greater site coverage, more building height, reduced parking, moving forward with this proposal.
Questions for Ms. Troutman? All right, and then, and I'm not saying, Mr. Frank, that, is there anybody else who would like to have a chance first? And I will get back to you and we will bring you back up on that.
I would like to speak.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
Hello, my name's Morgan Will. I'm a senior planner at Storehog Engineering, located at 510 East 3rd Avenue in Spokane, Washington, 99202. And this testimony I'm providing is a supplement. Hopefully you saw I provided some written comments last Friday. We're providing the comments on behalf of our client, Airway Heights LLC, which is an owner of many acres of land in Airway Heights, currently zoned R2. And we did participate with written comments in the past, including our attendance and testimony at the Planning Commission. And so we'd like to continue to provide you input on our concerns about this zoning code update and our support of it. Both. First of all, I'd like to just kind of outline, I think, I hope you all see that you kind of have several options in front of you. I think we see it as the city staff and their consultant team has presented, you know, like the original ordinance language. There's also in front of you the resolutions from the Planning Commission with their recommendations for changes. And so their version of the ordinance update. And then, of course, you have the opportunity to make further revisions. And we're requesting basically that you, at the minimum, approve the ordinance updates as recommended by the Planning Commission. And that would include, particularly for us, adoption of the draft ordinance number C1079 attachment A, which includes the Planning Commission's recommendations for the NFR zone, which is what the R2 is going to be folded into. And of course, we have listed in our letter, and then I'd like to kind of outline some of the reasons why we'd like to see those Planning Commission recommendations adopted. So I just want to outline those briefly. In the Planning Commission's recommendation, they recommend the lot size minimum be 6,000 square feet. And we, of course, support that because that's the current standard for a minimum lot size in the R2 zone. The original version actually increased the minimum lot size. And so we felt that that's not appropriate, seeing as that would take away our right to develop our land to the current zoning standard. It would actually create a higher burden on us. Knowing that also other people in the community, not everybody is going to, develop missing middle housing. Somebody might have a 12,000 square foot lot, as I told the Planning Commission, and they plan to divide it into two and sell one, for their retirement. And with the increase that was proposed from the current 6,000 up to 7,200 square feet would mean that somebody couldn't do that simple lot division. We consider that taking away development rights instead of, expanding development rights, which I think was the intention of the code update. And we really appreciate the Planning Commission hearing our concerns and recommending that change. Another change the Planning Commission recommended was to have the maximum lot coverage be 50%. That is, as shown in the slides, also the current standard in the R2 zone when you have a building and its garage included. Is 50%. And so we're asking that you adopt the Planning Commission's recommendation because that would keep the current rights of a person who owns a house to develop their lot with 50%. Whereas the proposed was actually reducing the lot coverage down to 40%, basically taking away rights of somebody who wants to develop a building on their lot. Then, of course, these standards that are being applied to these newly designated zones are going to apply to everybody, not just people who are planning on doing a subdivision or somebody who's planning on doing a unit lot subdivision to develop these smaller lots, as have been discussed. So I think the Planning Commission recognized that if anybody just has an existing lot and wants to build on it, they're going to be limited to 40% if you adopt the original language. That would be taking away their current rights to build at 50% or to divide their land into two 6,000 square foot lots. So we highly encourage you to adopt the ordinances with the Planning Commission's recommendations. And that is actually true. We have a current subdivision application on a portion of the land owned that's zoned R2. And we've developed the application, we've submitted it, we've had it reviewed, we've got comments, we've had 2 resubmittals. And it's based on the current code that each lot is going to be 6,000 square feet. So obviously we're very nervous that we're not going to be vested in the current code. And if you adopt these ordinances the way they're originally drafted, increasing the minimum lot size to 7,200 square feet per lot, that would make our current land development proposal not conforming. So it's very important for us that you consider, taking away that right for us to have single family dwelling lots of 6,000 and not do that. And instead choose the Planning Commission's path of 6,000 as the minimum. And in summary, basically there's some of the other issues that were discussed, Mr. Frank and the staff and you guys have been discussing. We're also of the opinion that the floor area ratio code proposed under 17.06.075, really should just be removed in its entirety. We're of the similar mind to Mr. Frank, who spoke about how there's other elements of the code, such as the maximum lot coverage, the setbacks, the height restrictions. They are tools like the floor area ratio to control the size and massing of structures. And if you just think about any lot with a house on it, it has setbacks and it has a height restriction and nobody cares about how many square feet are on the inside as long as it looks good from the street. And so we feel that the floor area ratio code is just adding an extra layer of bureaucracy and cost to the home building community, which will discourage home building instead of encourage it. And it won't do much to ensure the buildings built in the city of Airway Heights are more compatible with the neighbors, because the lot coverage and the setbacks and the height restrictions will do that. You don't need the floor area ratio to achieve your goals, in our opinion. So again, if you're going to consider additional revisions, we would consider taking a second look at 1706-075 and removing it in its entirety. The other thing I'd like to appreciate the staff, they made a correction. We mentioned maybe a Scrivener's error in our letter, and I think I saw on slide 22 the staff fixed that by changing the order in some of their graphics from alley versus no alley front setback. So it looks like that's been corrected, such that if you have an alley, your front setback would be 10 feet on the street. You only have a 20-foot setback when you do not have an alley. And lastly, in summary, I think there was a question that Mr. Frank brought up that was very good, and maybe the staff can provide some clarity on it. The idea that a shared driveway is the same thing as an alley. There's some situations where an alley in the back aren't appropriate, and the current code allows the city engineer to make a determination on that. I think the intent of the requirement for an alley when there's 5 or more units is that the units don't take a driveway directly from the street. They take the driveway from a separate access point, such as an alley. And I think Mr. Frank is right on that a shared driveway, maybe on a side yard, would achieve that same goal as an alley. And we think that should be something that is considered an alley, as a shared driveway. Finally, there was some discussion about the size of a unit lot subdivision and how many lots are allowed to be in a unit lot subdivision. I'm not going to weigh in on that, but I do think that I saw an edit between like January and the March versions where if somebody is doing a subdivision and wants to do a unit lot subdivision at the same time, that is allowed to happen concurrently. But a revision was made to not allow that to happen at the same time as a long plat. I thought that was disappointing. Currently, it does allow it to happen at the same time as a short plat, so that is encouraging. But we didn't understand the revision, and if it was allowed a unilot subdivision, which would create these lots that were described as could be as small as the footprint of the house. If that could happen concurrently with a long plat, it would just make it more convenient and less bureaucratic if somebody wanted to do 12 lots. Right now, if you wanted to do 9 lots or less, you could do it concurrently. But if you want to do 12 lots, well, now you have to do 2 separate lot subdivision applications, one for 9 and one for the remaining 3. So that just creates an unnecessary bureaucracy when unit lot subdivisions cannot happen concurrently with a long plat. So if you have any questions, I appreciate answering some time to answer those. But again, please adopt these ordinances with the Planning Commission's recommendations. Thank you for your time.
I don't want to belabor this, Mr. Well, but let me ask you your opinion on something. Can you build me a 3-story house with 9-foot interior ceilings with a 412 pitch roof with a 35-foot height restriction? Can you do that?
I believe, I concur with Mr. Frank. It is very challenging because the finished floor is not always the level of the sidewalk out front or the level of the yard. Most houses have a few steps up to the porch level and a couple inches from the porch level over the threshold to the finished floor. And so I concur that the 45 feet height limit recommended by the Planning Commission is a easy button. It allows the building community to build buildings that meet the needs of the community. Does that mean somebody could squeeze in a 4-story building? Yes, you could put a 4-story building with a flat roof.
I wasn't asking about a
Yeah.
4-story, Mr. I asked you, can you stand up a 3-story house, 9-foot interior ceilings with a 412 pitch roof if we maintain this 35-foot height restriction? You said it was challenging, but can you do that or not?
I think the answer is no in missing middle
Okay.
housing because
That's all I needed to
yeah,
hear.
yeah, I think it's no in missing
Okay.
middle housing. A little small toaster bread house, maybe, but the distance from sidewall to sidewall would put that peak too high.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you for asking.
All right. Is there anybody else that would like to?
Hi, good evening. Elizabeth Tellison with Winston and Cachet. And I've been working with Greenstone as well as Habitat in their Highland Village. Eric Lyons with Habitat, who spoke to the Planning Commission, wasn't able to be here tonight. And so I wanted to echo not only what Mr. Frank said, but what Eric presented to the Planning Commission, which is also Habitat's goal of providing home ownership through the affordable housing process. And that in their analysis, both in relationship to their Highland experience and their other projects across both the region and the country, that the restrictions that are being proposed for this particular middle housing is too restrictive for them to build houses for homeownership or units for homeownership. And so Habitat would also support the Planning Commission's recommendation for the increased height as well as building coverage and the reduction in lot size. I want to direct you to the Department of Commerce guidance with regard to building height. The 35 feet is not their max, that's their minimum. And so the idea that somebody can build within that is the smallest envelope that we're going to be able to use. And if the city truly wants to advocate for and support this middle housing, allowing a bigger envelope builds that flexibility, gives people the opportunity to try and fit their projects and a variety of projects within these proposed codes. So we would ask that those minimums be extended to allow additional lot coverage, to allow additional height, and similarly to get rid of the FAR because it becomes too restrictive. And I represent a variety of not only nonprofit developers, but for-profit developers. And the easy button is what they pick. And if somebody wants to come in and build 3 townhouses and they're too crunched and they're too small and they can't fit on a lot without going through a PUD application, they're not going to do it. A short plat is administrative, it's easy, it's supposed to be streamlined, it's supposed to go quick. Having to add a PUD to that is another layer of administration, which includes public hearing, notice, and a much more involved process than would be typically used for the short plat, which was what's intended, was to keep this streamlined and easy. So we would ask that you not rely entirely on the PUD for the flexibility for these middle housing codes. Again, we hear from staff and from the consultants, these models, they work. Sure, they can work. But are they building a desirable product for the city to use? And are they going to be a product that people are going to come and build? And we think, and you've heard from not only Greenstone, but Habitat, that no, these are not codes that we are going to use to build infill projects. Don't want to be too repetitive, so going through my notes. Thank you.
Hey, can I ask you a quick question while you're
Absolutely.
thumbing through that? You kept using the word additional. Can you put a number on that? Additional height or additional lot size or I can't
Fair.
quantify what that means.
Fair. We are supporting the Planning Commission's recommendation for 45-foot maximum height.
So can I ask you a question? Would you guys be okay with the language 45 feet, but limit it to 3-story?
That builds in flexibility for the product that Habitat is accustomed to, what Greenstone is advocating for. I think that accomplishes more flexibility. I'm not a builder, I won't pretend to be, but I do think that that gives some more flexibility than what's presently being proposed, yes. And
So-
the other additional, just to go back, is the 50% lot coverage instead of the 40 as recommended by Planning Commission.
So with that, with the minimum lot size of 6,000 compared to the 7,200, and now Heather, does that also restrict for every plot, the 7,200, or is our normal of the 6,000 square foot lot still in effect at that point?
I believe your question is having to do with what the recommended minimum lot size is for both zones.
Yeah.
And the minimum lot size recommended for both zones is 6,000 square feet. The planning commission recommended that, and that's in the package.
Okay, so,
So I'm not sure if there's a question about.
no,
our-
no, I was just making sure that specifics. Yeah, and that's what we were talking about, you know, I think it's being confused, the 7,200, where's that coming from?
It's coming from the existing R1 zone. So what this reflects and what the analysis showed is that we were combining multiple zones into one. And at one end, the R1 zone currently has a 7,200 square foot minimum lot size. And the R2 had a 6,000 square foot minimum.
But now
lot
both of
size.
them will have.
And so moving forward, the planning commission's recommendation is for that single consolidated zone to be 6,000. But the source of it is the existing R1.
So what would be an issue if we lifted it to 45 feet, but limited it to the 3-story
Because it's still 45 feet. The issue is not,
story internal?
it's not the stories, it's the height, and it has to do with the character of the community in which you're in. And so previously in this presentation, the consultant identified that the average height in this community is actually about 22 feet. Most homes that go above a single story usually go to 2 stories in height. So it has to do with the character of the community, not what would be allowable, not would be the choice. It would be, as you're looking at infill development, the overall height of the building, regardless of the number of stories that are included in that. And going back to the PowerPoint presentation, there are 2 examples from Vancouver that were provided to us from the development community showing that you could do a 3-story building with pitched roofs within the 35 feet. And so from a community standpoint, we already have a 35-foot height limit. It's just how people design that building moving forward by their choice.
I just heard 2 people tell me that they couldn't build what you just said in a 35-foot height.
And
I
what
just
we've
had-
shown you and what we've shown you on the
I just
presentation
asked-
is a
I just-
model code produced
yeah.
by the city of Vancouver that they're using in order to show development envelopes and how it can work with different configurations similar to the cottage housing within those building heights. And so back on page 21 of the slide, if Jeff wants to put that up, that is available. Again, this has to do with choices that individual developers would want to make within a height limit.
So
And so-
even this one right here, pitch roof, is still within the 35 foot.
That is correct. These were heights that were analyzed by framework based on the Vancouver model. Of
That's
various-
8-foot interior ceilings though, right? 8,
That's meeting minimum requirements
right, not
within.
9 feet, 8 feet.
Correct.
Yeah.
Those are choices that a developer makes. And so what you have is a situation in which there's a desire to provide a different floor plate to ceiling ratio. And as a result of it is a request, as I understand, for increased height.
Then can you go back to the other one?
It's also common for cities to measure building height to the median point of a pitched roof rather than the top. Just another consideration. And with regards to the 4 stories, what we typically see with 4-story townhouses is that's typically a luxury product. There are 4-story townhouses, for example, in Kendall Yards, and they tend to be quite expensive. I believe there was one for sale recently in the $800,000 to $900,000 range. Also wanted to point out, and maybe the Department of Commerce folks that are here could speak to this, but the model code, which establishes a 35-foot height limit, had a very extensive, and I believe this is documented, technical advisory group, including architects and other designers. It also includes a floor to area ratio standard. I can also confirm that one of our clients has adopted a code with a floor to area ratio standard. So the statement earlier that no cities are using it is incorrect.
So I apologize. We're interrupting the testimony for
No,
Ms. Tellison,
sorry
but
about that.
that is the source of the minimum lot size. The recommendation, to be clear, is coming from the planning commission at 6,000 square feet for both zones.
We often interrupt.
Sorry about that, ma'am.
Not a problem at all. Just to clarify again, and the varying choices that you keep hearing about are, certainly choices that a developer makes, but the developer makes them because they are saleable, they are marketable, they are livable. And that's what you're hearing tonight, which is in order to make these units saleable, livable, wantable for people to own, we need more flexibility. So we hope you will honor that. We hope you will follow the Planning Commission's recommendation. And again, thank you all. This is a tough topic to grapple with, so we appreciate your time.
No, and it is, and we appreciate you guys coming in because, something that's important to us is the identity of our community. And the identity of our community is as marked from, previous, not just conversations, but surveys and a lot of other just outreach that we've done throughout the years is very important to us at how we look as a city and moving forward as well. So this is a huge consideration because this changed the landscape of what Airway Heights is going to look like forever. So, and we just need to kind of balance that with what the community wants. So with us being representatives of the community, that's something that I take in high regard is how the community feels. So we're not saying no, we're not saying yes. We just want to make sure that we hear everybody and we've done quite a bit of research into this as well ourselves. But sir, please.
Honorable Chair, Council, Jerry Storhaug, 510 East 3rd Avenue, Spokane, Washington. And I'm a civil engineering consultant that's worked in the city for probably over 30 years and various developments over that time period. Appreciate all the efforts that staff and the city and has put forward in bringing this to the community. It's going to be an asset. It really is good. I also want to just emphasize that you do have some great stakeholders here tonight and have been involved in the process, and just want to emphasize you to take their comments seriously. They're folks that they're invested, they're experienced, they know what they're doing, they know what the market is. Probably I'd say probably better than most of us do. So just 6 points I just want to reiterate. I'm not going to belabor on any of them. The 45-foot height, I think, allows some character to be added to the community. It makes these townhomes and these future homes to be more livable. So I want to emphasize that. Site coverage, Planning Commission wanted to go higher than the 40%. I fully support that. I think that really helps us make this product more viable. The floor area ratio, I think you've heard it many times. It's just with all the other restrictions that we have, it's just unnecessary, and I'm afraid it will push people away from taking advantage of this middle housing that we all want to see succeed. If there's a way that we can expand above that 9 units, that is, I think Morgan had mentioned that maybe we don't restrict it to the short plats. We allow it to be something that can be applied to a long platting process. It would allow some scalability. And the final point I wanted to just talk about is the 7,200 square foot versus 6,000. It really is in some of in the R2 zoning right now, we have the ability to go down to 6,000 square feet, moving that up to 7,200 square feet. It's just going in another direction that I don't know is quite fair to those property owners. I don't think it is, I guess. But that being all I want to say. So thank you for your time.
All right. And then sneaking up behind you.
Hi, my name is Karen Inman. I live at 13220 West Sixth Avenue. And I'd like to, outside of this topic that you're on right now, I'd like to discuss the Sixth Avenue. So I'd like to be part of the discussion when you have the next meeting on that. But I want to formally protest to the city council because you're not hearing from us. You're not hearing, I've gone to the public meetings, I've gone
And,
to,
and this is specifically about Sixth Avenue?
yes,
So ma'am, right now, this is actually a public hearing for,
I totally understand. I just want to be formally invited to the
absolutely.
next meeting because we're not being heard.
And then at the very end, I can also open up the floor for public comment on any other measures outside of the public hearing. So I do appreciate it. But for this public hearing, we do have to keep it to,
Okay, I'll go sit down. Thank you.
so thank you. And then is there anybody else online who would like to address council as well? Please raise your hand. All right, I'm not seeing anybody else that is presently here would like to address him. Ms. Frank, please.
I just a couple things I wanted to respond to that were said by the staff. Could you put the graphic that had all the different unit types for site coverage and FAR?
Jeff, can you put up the drawing that shows the different site coverages with the different types of units?
FAR ratio one. Yeah, that one. You can see on, I think that when I used the word apartment, I'm really saying rentals. Not, I'm making a distinction between home ownership and apartments or rentals. And so you can see on this drawing on the far right-hand side where it says multifamily, you're allowed to build a sixplex there. And you can put multiple sixplexes together and you have an apartment project. That's what you have. And those are the things that I believe are not what families are looking for. They're looking for home ownership. And so they're looking for the products that are on the left-hand side of that drawing, not the ones that are on the right-hand side of the drawing. And you can see on the right-hand side of the drawing, because the FAR ratio goes up as you have more units clustered together, you can end up with great big buildings on a lot because you get a FAR ratio that's much higher. And on the left-hand side, you don't. And so these are the kind of things that are going to encourage developers to build things on the right-hand side of that drawing and not on the left-hand side. We need to have flexibility to build home ownership. And so I urge you, and no one wants to build 4 stories, by the way, and I would be perfectly happy with 45 feet and 3 stories. No one's trying to build 4 stories, but you're trying to build units that have a pitched roof on them that provide variety in what the units look like and fit in with single family neighborhoods that all have pitched roofs mostly. So the 45 feet and the recommendations of the Plan Commission, elimination of the FAR ratio. And then what's really important is that when you have to do this unit lot subdivision, that it not be restricted to 9 units, it restricted to something like 3 acres or something, so that it makes it easier to create homeownership and you don't create a complicated process for homeownership. Thank you. Oh, by the way, Houston's up by 3 points at halftime.
I know Duke got 100 out of there. Go ahead.
Heather, I was wondering, could you speak to the 3 acres versus the 9 units? The advantages and disadvantages?
It's intended to be confusing and it's really not. So in the state law, the way that the Department of Commerce adopted this unit lot subdivision is having to do with the simpler administrative process, and by law, it's limited to 9 units. Or 9 lots. Any size, as long as no lot is smaller than the minimum, it's the 9 and it's an administrative process. Because this is an infill project and the idea is that you're adding units to existing lots, you're allowing the development of 2 or more homes on new lots. This provision was intended to go retroactively or parallel to the development of those multiple units and allow for them to be sold. So considering that all of these housing types are talking about 1 unit, 2 unit, 3 unit, right? You don't need more lots. You don't need more than 9 lots in order to exercise the unit lot subdivision. What this is a request to bypass the process and to facilitate this type of housing with unit lot subdivision. And that's why they're requesting it to go with that other type of process under the state law, was when you divide lots and you create 10 or more. So the dilemma in the unit lot subdivision, because we're given this package of requirements, is that if you were to take a piece of property and you were to make 50 lots using the unit lot subdivision with the long plat process, we're required to tie every lot together for development purposes. So every time that somebody wants to add on, we have to look at all of the properties to make sure there's still enough site coverage left. When you start to look at the inside of that subdivision, the standards like front yard setback don't apply, because they only apply to the larger original parent lot. That's one of the reasons why, even though there are communities in the state that have adopted the ability to do unit lot subdivision with long plat, the Department of Commerce has recommended that we be consistent and we limit it to the short plat process, which is no more than 9 lots, irregardless of size, because of these other provisions that tie these properties together forever. If you want to do a master development with 50 or 100 units, the appropriate process is to do a long subdivision with the PUD and master plan it. And while we've heard a lot about bureaucracy, there is a purpose. That purpose is public access. That is ensuring parking. It is ensuring access for our public safety partners, including fire and police, ensuring that we have adequate utility access. And by master planning a development with a larger number of units or lots through a PUD, that allows for a review of process to ensure that there's compliance and that individual lots are able to have a standard apply them as we move forward with the different types of development. So you've heard a lot about the Salins Complex. There are the communities that have already adopted these standards. They're already moving forward. Yes, there are communities that have adopted unit lot subdivision with the long plat process, which is 10 or more lots, but that's not Commerce's recommendation. And that's one of the reasons why, as we move into this, we're very highly aware of the consequences as we move forward. And yes, it does mean if someone goes through a PUD process, that it's a public hearing. The public has a right to hear and understand what is being proposed and weigh in on that process. It does require the council to hear and consider a PUD, which is a form of rezone, as part of that process. Plats, no matter what in state law, have a preliminary and a final application. That's not going to change by anything that we're doing here. And yes, under the state law, you can combine a proposed missing middle project with the unit lot subdivision and the short plat process. So you're not required to build all of that housing. You can envision on a small scale these types of developments moving forward. So that is why this isn't an issue of acreage. It's an issue of how big is the complex that you're creating through these lots, and how many of those new homes are going to be tied together for future development under the parent parcel requirements.
All right, any other questions for Ms. Troutman?
I just have one, oh, go ahead. I have one clarification to make on driveways, but go ahead.
I just was going to clarify as far as all the discussion tonight, the primary ordinance this relates to is 1706.
Pardon?
Primary ordinance this relates to 1706 for most of these, or is it spread out? And then is the unit lot subdivision 17.17?
The two zones that we're talking about, which are the neighborhood residential, are in 706, and then the multifamily residential is in 1709. And just a clarification on that table, why there's multifamily is because the law says that anywhere we allowed single family, we have to update the standards. So we were just showing that we're not changing the multifamily zone standards for multifamily. But you still could build missing middle in a multifamily zone piece of property.
So with these, is there any way we can push item O and item R back for future discussion as well on this matter and not vote for them this evening? Is that what you were
I was going
getting
to echo
at?
that. It's unfortunate that we had to cancel the last study session. There's just so much disagreement among professionals and experts, and we're up here. None of us that I know of planning and building experience in at this evening. I am yearning for more deliberation.
Well, in the study session, we're not able to deliberate, but if there was a specific item that you had questions on in a briefing, or are you requesting a continuation of the hearing?
I mean, deliberation amongst, ourselves and.
I mean, I think it's future question, it's questions regarding these. Now that we've, heard from experts around, that I think it brings up additional, questions for us as council of, are we doing the right thing? Can we kind of pick and choose, like, where are we at? Rather than just as we're presented this evening, can we just push out another 2 weeks until another,
I would not recommend passing any of these provisions because most of them rely on the creation of these two zones. So a lot of them are adopting by reference zoning classification. And so it's very difficult to adopt, for example, traffic impact fee ordinance because it's referencing a zone. So if there were, questions, I would recommend, potentially what I think you're considering is closing the public comment, continuing the hearing to a date certain for council deliberation and questions about the documentation and the materials already on the record. That would probably be one option that you could pursue.
and that would take all the ordinance here out of tonight's vote for action, and then it would be moving them forward.
Yes, because many of them are highly dependent on those two main zones and what decisions that are made there. The only one that's separate from that would be potentially this 1716, which is the subdivision code, which basically creates the unit lot subdivision process as part of the short plat process, which is part of the state law.
All right, council, regarding these items, would you like to, or would anybody like to bring, an action, a vote up to motion or to table these items for?
Point of clarification, I think you may need to close the public testimony portion of today's hearing.
Yeah, and then, so we'll go ahead and close. If there's no other comment for city council, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing at 7:34 for public comment. And then, well, actually, we'll just go through the consent agenda and everything else real quick, and then when we get up there. So the consent agenda, item A is council consideration to approve the city council minutes from March 17th, 2025. And the purchase approval registry for Payne Hamlin in the amount of $40,862.50. Council, what would you like to do about the consent agenda?
Move to approve.
Move to approve. I have a motion, I have a second. Any further questions or comments? All those in favor? All right, the consent agenda passes unanimously. And then just to change the order that, can I get a motion on the ordinances for this evening?
I would move to table ordinances G through I guess BB for further discussion and later date, potentially the next legislative session.
Items G through BB.
Correct. Those are the ordinances that encompass everything because they're interconnected. Yep.
All right, I have a motion. Do I have a second? All right, any questions or comments? All right, all those in favor of tabling items G through BB? All right, and that passed unanimously. Those items are tabled. That'll move us on to item D, which is the 2024 Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Grant Acceptance. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, Steve Flood, City Engineer. I have before council tonight the agenda item 2024 Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Consolidation Grant. Some background for you. In February 2024, council authorized an MOU with West Prairie Village Mobile Home Park for preparing a feasibility study for extending city water service. As part of the MOU, the city agreed to pursue and administer grant funds to pay for the feasibility study. We applied for this particular consolidation grant late in 2024, and we were just recently notified that we had been awarded $50,000 to pursue this consolidation study. There is no city match. I just wanted to get it in front of the council so that we could officially ask you to approve receipt of those funds.
Okay, council, what would you like to do about item C? Go ahead. I have a motion. Do I have a second? All right, I have a second. Any questions or comments? Seeing any, all those in favor? All right, that passed unanimously. Items D and F were moved to the very end following executive session. So we will move on to item E right now as the CTR plan acceptance. So at that point, the floor is. Rip.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair and council, the city's obligated to develop a commute trip reduction plan in conjunction with the businesses that exist within the city based on a certain employee count. The council previously authorized the creation of that plan. We worked with the consultant to develop that, and the draft document is before you for council action. We're asking that the council adopt the plan, after which we'll transmit it to the respective agencies to just document that is complete.
All right. Okay. All right, council, what would we like to do about this item?
Move to approve.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? I have a second online. Mr. Ritchie, any questions or comments? Not seeing any. All those in favor of the CTR plan acceptance? All right, that passed unanimously. That'll move us on to Item CC, which is the first read of ordinance C-1093. Bert, floor is yours for reading it into the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Council. This is the first read of ordinance C-1093, an ordinance of amending ordinance C-1039 passed by the City Council on December 2, 2024, and entitled an ordinance of the City of Airway Heights, Washington, adopting the budget for the fiscal year ending December 31, 2025. This ordinance is an introduction to amend the budget that was approved by City Council. Currently, you see the adjustments. There's further adjustments being made as we speak. So next week, so this first reading, there's no action required at this point or requested from staff. I will present this at the next study session next week with more detail for your considerations.
All right, first first reading, we'll move it forward. Item DD. First read of ordinance C-1094.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is ordinance number C-1094, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Airway Heights, Washington, amending ordinance number C-1069, setting position salaries and compensation for appointed officers and employees of the City of Airway Heights for 2025 and providing for the effective date thereof. This ordinance, similar to the first read of the budget amendment, is an introduction of the salary ordinance. We have a position added. Let me just go to the right. A payroll account which was approved by the City Council on March 17th, 2025, as well as the code compliance officer, which was approved by City Council on March 3rd, 2025. Introduction, staff is not asking for a action as of now.
Comments or questions, council, for one? Not seeing any. All right, we will move that one forward. Nothing for resolution. If there's anybody at this point from online who would like to address council, I'd like to open the floor for citizen comment. Not seeing anybody. Follow up afterwards. Okay. Yeah, and go ahead and move on. Mr. Tripp, do you want to?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair and Council, I recognize you. I think you're preparing to head to executive session next. And I'm unsure as to whether or not you'll adjourn after that or not. But while you're all here, several of you are aware of previous conversations regarding the development of a aquifer protection area on the West Plains for Medical Lake, Cheney, Airway Heights. There is conversation occurring and an interest in getting together with the three cities to determine whether or not that's something the three communities want to move forward with in conjunction with City of Spokane and perhaps Spokane Valley. And I'd just like to get an indication as to if there's a council member who'd like to participate in those conversations so that we can start getting them scheduled. This is an aquifer protection area. Be similar to the aquifer protection area that's existed within Spokane Valley for, I think, about 20 years, principally around education. But this was a topic of conversation for the West Plains around that broader conversation of PFAS contamination and whether or not there's value in putting in place a similar type of aquifer protection area to provide education about the limitations associated with the aquifer, but more importantly, the protection of the aquifer from the standpoint of future contamination or just future challenges that might have a negative impact upon it.
Is this how long has this been around? Is this a newly formed coalition?
The group has yet to be formed.
Okay, so this is new.
Correct.
Okay.
You want to volunteer for this one?
Yeah, because it's hand in glove with what I'm already doing, so.
And our resident advisor for that. Okay. Item 15, executive session. There's a call for an executive session, so I'll go ahead and move the floor.
The purpose of the executive session is to discuss with legal counsel current or potential litigation. And I would say that we will take approximately 30 minutes. And so we would reconvene for regular session at 8:15.
All right. Go ahead. Do we want to break down?
I think we were going to head downstairs.
Yep. Okay. All right, we will go ahead. Basketball. Says basketball, but it was the curve. All right, where's Albert at? I am hungry. My stomach is screaming at me right now. All right, well, go ahead and move on to item D, which is gonna be the release and settlement statement for Kelly Justice. Vote on it. All right, would anybody like to bring a motion on that?
Move to approve the Kelly Justice Release and Settlement Agreement.
I have a motion, then I got a second for Kevin. Any questions or comments? All right, all those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstained? We have 5 yeses, one abstention. The matter passes. Item F is the release and settlement agreement for Timothy Hall. Can I get a motion for this item?
Move to approve the Timothy Hall Release and Settlement Agreement.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? I have a second. Any question or comments? Not seeing any. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? We have 1 abstention. That matter passes. 5 to 1 abstention. All right, with that being said, we will go ahead and adjourn at 8:18. Thank you. Took too long.
That's good. Huh?